Good evening and welcome to the PoliticIt podcast. Tonight we have Sophie Anderson and Jennifer Orten. Good to have you ladies here. I've heard a lot about your efforts, and the first thing that comes to my mind is GRAMA request. And, I want to know a little bit about what you're finding out in the education space. Also, I'd like to hear the story about your kids and the privilege walk and stuff.
Okay, yeah. Well, I think maybe a good place to start is how we decided to perform some GRAMA requests. I think living in Salt Lake County, my children and I are very familiar with proponents of critical race theory and people that believe that it's good and a thing that we should be instituting. And so for months, I had been so frustrated by the things I was seeing, the things my kids were being forced to take part in at school, including privilege walks.
Why don't you explain what that is just a little bit?
Okay, so
some people aren't
of course
with
there's going to be all kinds of beautiful variations of a privilege walk, right?
Right.
But in our particular district, a privilege walk starts by the teacher placing a piece of tape on the floor, and all of the students start behind this piece of tape. So it's a start line, and all the kids are lined up behind it. And in my child's situation, the first question that was asked was, are your parents still married? So any child whose parents are still married takes a step forward. Another question was, are any of your family members incarcerated or have ever been incarcerated? Take another step forward. Well, eventually, as you can imagine, some kids get to the finish line. And the kids that get to the finish line are told to turn around and face the children that did not get to the finish line. And then they have to admit and apologize for their privilege. And I just know, in my child's experience, this is not the way you develop racial harmony.
And my child had the same thing at their junior high as well. He came home from school and said, "Mom, it was the strangest thing. I've never been embarrassed to be a white male before." And I was like, you got to be kidding me. This is junior high. You know, what's going on? And he explained a similar type of privilege walk as well. On the south end of the valley, where I live in the Salt Lake Valley.
And very interestingly, just today, my daughter, who attends a Salt Lake District middle school, she texted me today and she said, "Will you please come pick me up?" And I was like, why? She said, because the teacher is standing up here saying how we have to all be sorry that we're white, and we can never forget what white people did to black people, and we have to live our lives in a way to apologize for that.
And that's not even just coming from the teachers. It is so ingrained in the curriculum. I know just this past week I had a son who was working on 11th grade English, and the curriculum was just repetitively beating down white Christians over and over and over again. I took screenshots, and he alerted me. He said, "Mom, I get the story of slavery. I get the story of our history. I get that, but how come everything is the fault of white Christians?" And he knew better.
What troubles me a lot about this, this fight between the oppressors and the oppressed, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any problem with telling about acts of oppression in the past. Yep. That's not a problem. And I think the better story, though, is how people overcame this oppression, right? But to paint this whole narrative that it's that way, it'll always be that way, that there's this original sin, type mentality, and the only way to get out of it is to admit your privilege and become woke and act just like they do.
And I view it as abuse. We are abusing children. If we teach them this, for example, my mother, she's a Cuban refugee. She came from Cuba when she was 17 years old, didn't speak the language. She came here with nothing, knowing nothing, and by hard work and a belief that her own merit would get her where she needed to be, she was able to excel. But what we're doing to this generation is we're putting them in a box and saying, you are not privileged, you are underprivileged, you're oppressed, you have no way to succeed. It's so damaging.
What's interesting too is they use this lens of racism. So when you look at the world through a lens of racism, what do you find? You find racism, right? And it's really from the standpoint of our country, I think it would be better to use the lens of liberty.
Absolutely.
And say, how did freedom change things? Because I just listened to you and your mom. What was the difference in her life?
100%.
Right?
Freedom.
Yeah, because, and the other thing I really don't like is this idea that somehow the privileges we have, which we should admit, that all of us are privileged from living in the greatest country on the face of the earth.
Even getting an education in and of itself is a privilege.
Right.
But I think there's a responsibility with that to make sure that it is fair and it's accurate and it doesn't create these biases that don't need to be there necessarily. I mean, my son, for example, a different son on this one, he had a history class just this year, and the very first day and repeatedly for about a week, the teacher said, look, we're gonna talk about the Civil War, and we are only gonna mention Black leaders. And my son, I mean, thank goodness, raised his hand, and he's like, well, weren't there other leaders too? And she said, well, yes, but we're not going to talk about those. Those don't matter.
Like the guy named Lincoln?
Right. And he said, well, how can I understand a war which is two-sided if you're only telling me one side of it? And he dropped the class after. He said, Mom, I'm not going to do this. And to be honest with you, I was proud of him. And I said, well, we'll try again with a different class next time. But how good of an education can we get when we're only telling part of the story?
Well, and if the whole focus is on how oppressed you are or how privileged you are, which group of kids does that benefit?
Right.
Neither one, right?
Well, I believe it damages both.
Yeah.
I mean, because the person who feels or is labeled as being more privileged has this guilt, and the one that's left behind has this complex of inferiority. So what is the point in bringing this up in school? I mean, am I wrong to think just teach them math, just teach them science, just teach them how to read, and leave the rest alone?
Yeah, I mean, this whole, the way this manifests itself the most in Utah right now is through this social emotional learning.
Yes.
Right? And that's the other thing I have a problem with, because if you say, okay, we're going to turn every school teacher into a psychologist, right?
Exactly.
A therapist. And you think, oh my gosh, what experiments are they trying on our kids?
Yes.
100%.
Right. And so I don't think any of that makes sense. Now, you guys know a little bit about this SEL, don't you?
We know a lot about this. And so
And this ties into this GRAMA request.
it
stuff,
does.
right?
It does. I mean, Jen and I had not met yet when this particular situation first started, but we have the same beliefs, the same thinking, and so I'm sure over in her corner of Salt Lake, Utah, she was thinking about these things.
Well, let me just remind you that we met through CRT SEL issues.
Yes,
That is how we came in contact.
You should tell that story.
Yeah.
Should
Do you have a
tell that
minute?
Yeah, let's
Okay,
do that.
so we live in Draper, but my oldest daughter went to West High her senior year. Kind of a long story. She went there just to play basketball. She graduated early and things like this. Anyway, at her graduation that night, this was this year, May of 2021, a school board member, do you remember her last name?
I don't. I can't.
I can't remember her name off the top of my head. Somebody from the Salt Lake City School Board stood up and gave the speech about the benefits of education. And this is available online if you want to hear the whole thing. It was horrific. And she's talked about what the most important thing she wants people to learn as they are graduating that year, and the best advice she can give them going forward into the future, is to know that Black Lives Matter and to go out and fight against oppression, to take a drink, that is a quote, learn to swear, and do all sorts of these other things. Trust the science, get vaccinated. And I was like, that is the best advice you as an educator representative has for my daughter going into the world. Well, that's how I met Sophie, because this is going on, and I'm texting this Telegram group going, am I the only one hearing stuff like this at my kid's graduation? And my daughter, who was there in the audience getting ready to graduate, she said, Mom, if I wasn't in the middle of a row of these football players that I couldn't get around, I would have walked out. It was offensive even to her at that point. And it was disappointing what happened. And so I went and talked to this lady afterward, and she asked if I wanted a picture with her. And, and I said, no, I just need to let you know that your speech you gave was the most memorable one I've ever heard. And she's like, oh, good. I said, no, it was horrific. How dare you have an opportunity to help lead these kids in the right direction, and all you can say is teaching them to be rebellious. And I said, what is the point you really wanted to make? Just between us afterward, no pressure of speaking. And she said, Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. If I can get all of these kids to be actively engaged in the movement that Black Lives Matter, I've done my job.
Well, and the whole thing is Black lives do matter.
They do.
Right? And you can't argue with that.
Yeah.
But my belief is they do matter, and that's why the greatest way for someone to come out of poverty or to come out of oppression is to have a good education. Right?
But again,
so let's spend time educating people.
Well, she's talking to an audience that was very diverse ethnically, which was fine. I mean, obviously, we wouldn't have sent our kid to a school if we had a problem with that. That's not the issue. The issue was she's talking to an audience of, all these different nationalities, and she's calling out just a small portion. They all of them matter. All lives matter.
Right. Yeah, of course, Black lives matter. Right.
Right.
And what you were saying about the the fact that there were a lot of different ethnic groups there,
which was great,
and all of them matter, right?
Everyone equally.
And I believe that if we really believe that, what we would do is try to give people the same privilege, and that privilege, from a school perspective, is a good education.
Absolutely.
Right.
And just interestingly, to your point, my mom has always said the greatest thing that ever happened to her was that CRT and SEL and all of these new ideologies were not put in place when she came to this country. And so she was able to have a completely clean start on her hard work, her merit, she wasn't ever feeling handcuffed like, oh, I shouldn't be succeeding because all of these people tell me that I'm underprivileged, so I shouldn't be. As a daughter of a Cuban refugee, what does equity mean? It means taking from others and handing out to others, not based on merit, not based on hard work. It is basically communism. Yeah. I mean, it is.
And someone else choosing what they're taking from you.
Yes.
It's one thing to give. I'm all for that and helping, but to just tell people that they are relegated to being, plus or minus 1 degree of everything they want to be, and that we're all the same. I mean, we don't want to be all the same. I mean, that's the beauty of our country. And the beauty of life is that we can make those choices and be who we want to be. And if it doesn't work for us, we can change ourselves. But when you're fit in that box of equity, everybody loses.
It's so true. And I've had very, very candid conversations with my mother about this. And she will tell me all the time, it is the ultimate insult to feel that I have to have equity practiced on me. That's the ultimate insult. I want a level playing field where everyone decides through their actions, their character, where they get in life.
Yeah, because and I think one thing confusing to people is that liberty is a personal thing, right?
Absolutely.
We're granted these rights as an individual. It's not a right that's given to white people, or transgendered people, or gay people, right, exactly. Or straight people.
Exactly.
It's a right that comes to an individual.
The pursuit of happiness.
There. And you're not rewarded by the group you belong to. You're rewarded by your merit, right? There's nothing in these natural rights that we have that says that because I belong to a group, I should have these special rights granted to me.
Exactly.
Right. And, you know, and therefore we live in a state, I think, where people are kind and they want to right injustices
Yep.
that they feel are there. But when you start talking about social justice, what does that mean anyway? Right? It comes down to what you were saying.
And why?
Right? It means that we have to compensate
Yep.
for somebody.
And why is that the focal point of my kid's entire education? That's the part I don't get. Should we acknowledge, are there social injustices? Absolutely. There's a lot of injustices.
When we say that Johnny can't read,
Right.
what we need to do is teach Johnny to read.
Teach Johnny to read.
Right.
Yeah.
He has the right to an education.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
But he doesn't have a right to keep Sam or somebody else
From getting.
from
yeah.
getting that
Absolutely.
same privilege, right?
And honestly, I think my my biggest fear and worry about this whole CRT push is and I've started to see this. It's starting like, let's get rid of all the honors classes, because you know that starts making people feel.
Yeah, if you just put those people in a corner, they're going to learn anyway.
Yep.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
Why waste money on them?
Yes.
But what's interesting is this whole idea, if you think about it, you know, under the old economic system, in order to get ahead, you had to rape and plunder different countries, right? The
Yep.
kings would send people out and they would go steal all the resources,
Yep.
right? They'd go after the gold,
Yeah.
right? But Adam Smith noticed something in this pin factory. He noticed that because of the Industrial Revolution, that people could stay in one place and they could produce more than they could consume, right?
Yes.
And so, you know, this idea that people that are wealthy, you know, should transfer their wealth to somebody else, that's based on an old methodology, and that is that there's a fixed pie. And if you're getting a bigger slice, it means I'm getting a smaller one.
Exactly.
But this growth mentality that came about because of the Industrial Revolution basically said, no, the pie's growing.
Yeah.
Everybody's becoming better off when Henry Ford started producing the cars.
There's no end to the pie.
Right.
Well-
It can grow. And even those that don't have much are going to have more as the pie grows, right?
And to your point, something my mom has always taught me, she said that it wasn't even about equity so much. It was like, as long as you don't have more than me. Like, if we're both miserable, perfect. But the minute anyone had a little bit more, then it's this, okay, we got to redistribute.
Right.
Got to
Right,
redistribute.
because the only reason why you got that is because you took it from somebody.
Yes.
Well, and it wipes out hard work. And this country was built on hard work, vision, creativity, courage, all of these things that are just, they're history now. That's it.
That's the point I was trying to get to. And that is, if those that actually learn very fast, if we keep them back, what's going to happen to the growth in the country?
I don't even want to think about
Right? And Margaret Thatcher used to say, at some point, the problem with socialism is that at some point you run out of other people's money.
it. Exactly.
There you go.
Right?
Exactly.
There you go.
Well, and to your point, so my mom went back to Cuba 3 years ago, and she took my then 15-year-old with her, they went back to visit family. And so what was so wonderful is, because my mom's a native, she wasn't, she didn't go to the tourist places where everyone thinks Cuba's beautiful, it's wonderful. No, she went to the real Cuba where people are starving. It's horrible. It's horrible. And so my daughter and my mother are there, and my whole family, extended family, they're just partying all day long. Like, no one goes and does anything. And my daughter turned to my mom and she's like, so do they never go to work, or like, did they take this time off while we're here in honor of us? And my mom's like, oh no, you don't understand. Under this system, you're paid the same whether you show up to work or you don't show up to work. So why would you ever show up to work if you're going to get the same thing? So that and that stuck in my daughter's mind. So it made a huge impact on her. But that's the kind of society we want. where
Well,
It's
you know,
not.
and when
It's
you
not.
when
It's
you
not.
talk about, for instance, just on the surface, when you talk about access,
Yep.
right? I think most people would look at that and say, "Oh yeah, everyone should have access," right?
Yeah.
And we're talking about educating kids.
right.
You know,
Yeah.
everybody's kid should be able to learn to read, right? And there's basic education that needs to take place. And every time we have a new program, a new social program or whatever, that's focused on changing people's concept of what the world is about, is actually putting them back rather than bringing them forward.
Exactly.
It is. And
Right.
I mean, even the standards that we're using now, I think this started with Common Core, right? And it's only progressed worse since then. But they're not measured on what they know anymore. It's what they believe. It's how they
How
perform.
they feel.
How they feel. And that's kind of a problem. I mean,
Yeah, because what's their future,
yeah.
right?
Well, it
The-
forces a kid to take a certain standpoint to get through school. If your success is measured on your belief system, how scary is it to try to come up with your own belief? I mean, it's a very, very dangerous situation we're in.
It really is. I mean, I watch my children navigate this situation at the Salt Lake schools, and it's, you know, if every single classroom you walk into has a Black Lives Matter flag in it, will you kind of start understanding how you have to navigate that class? And
And it's probably not a coincidence.
No.
Right? It's not everybody just all of a sudden waking up one day and saying,
No.
no,
You know.
no, it's
That's why
intentional.
That's
It's
why the
intentional.
$10,000 GRAMA request is so crucial. I mean, Sophie asked for things for years back. This wasn't just what's happening now; it's what has been happening. Who are the players, and we've mapped that out. And it's alarming, and it's been in process. Like I said, even from Common Core, I was on a school board back in probably what was that 2009, 2010, something like that for 5 years, and I could see it then. They didn't see it coming. I was the strange one that was like, we got to watch out
it'd
for
be
this.
really interesting for parents to be able to get a hold of this information. Have you got plans to maybe publish it on the web or?
So I did at first. I made it completely public to the we just posted them up because new developments and exciting things that we have in the future. we're going to keep it close to the chest just for a little while, and then we're going to blow it up. That's kind of what we're thinking.
Yeah, I mean, because the end result is we want to be effective. What's the best way to be effective? And at some point, we're working on the strategy of when and how best to take care of these situations and players to make sure that we don't have to deal with this again.
You know, and I guess in fairness, I like to say a lot of these people involved, I think actually believe they're doing the right thing.
They do.
They do.
They've been
And so it's
brainwashed.
not like they're you know that they're doing something nefarious that they know
Yeah.
is wrong, and you know, but
I go both
For
ways.
some,
I
for
go both
some.
ways on that. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
If you come out to parents, to the public, to legislators, and you are let's just pretend you're a state superintendent, and you to these people you are saying, we don't teach CRT. Every child's the same in Utah. We're not, you know, it's equal, not equitable, and all of these things, and you're creating this narrative that you're not doing any of these things, but then behind closed doors, you are facilitating the very thing you're saying you're not doing, and you are making it happen because you're in charge.
so do you think then they are aware based on your look at their
I have gone
emails?
for 4 months, in a row, like starting in, I don't know, was it August, I think? I went to every state school board meeting, and I looked at our state superintendent in the eye, and I said, why did you say this? Why did you say that? If you claim to be this, why are you saying this? And I would quote her directly from these GRAMA requests. And what was hilarious is by like the second or third month, they, at the beginning of the next month's meeting, they made an announcement. The first announcement was, if any of you board members feel fear for your safety, here is the exit. I'm like, oh, good. And that was one day that I was wearing my I'm a mother, aka a domestic.
Wasn't that the same day that Sydney Dixon didn't show up too?
Yes, that was the same day. But also what I found interesting is, isn't America the place where you have free speech and you can air your grievances to the people that are supposed to be,
Well, and that was also the meeting where thereafter they changed the rules for public comment, and Sophie and AIM members and other people were not allowed back to speak the next month because the board claimed they wanted new faces or
Yes, and before that meeting, before they started the agenda items at that one meeting, they said, and just a reminder that public comment is not to be used for like public ridicule or character assassination. I'm like, that's the whole point of public comment. Like, these people are ruining our children every single day, and they're doing the things that they're saying they're not doing. So of course I'm going to go there and call you out on it.
But again, if these meetings are happening, well, they are happening behind closed doors. We have no access to the Access Committee or the other committees.
The irony.
And we're getting stalling techniques to even get the public records that we have a right to in the first place. If we don't have a public comment, where is our voice? These people are there to represent us, the people, and our children. These are children. These are minors. We are trying to trust them with our children, and they are telling us to shut up. That is a problem to me.
Well, and I don't know how deep we want to go into this, but if you have a governor who is really playing into the hand of all of this, I mean, look at what's happened with the jazz. And I mean, we're only going to support minorities with these scholarships. I mean, what is that showing our children? I know my children are just like, governor, what? It doesn't even matter.
Well, and his wife is so active in it as well. That's the problem.
That is the problem.
Well, you know, and we have to ask ourselves, why is that? Is it because they don't really understand what's going on? Mm-hmm. Or are they fully aware of it? I mean, there's all kinds of questions like that, huh?
Well, the GRAMA records show that, at least for a majority, I would say, they're well aware of what they are doing.
I agree with you. I would love to say it's not intentional, it's not nefarious. I would love to be able to say that. I think we've had enough experience, we have enough data, we have enough communications that I can no longer say it's not intentional.
At least a majority.
Yes.
For a majority.
Yes.
Enough to get any vote they need passed through.
Well, I really appreciate you both coming in. I mean, we're running out of time, but I appreciate your grit, right? in pushing forward on these things. Yeah. And I think it's important that parents know that they can make a difference.
Again,
right?
These are our children. There is nothing we will not do to protect our children and everybody else's children in this. This is the future of our country, depends on the next generation.
It does. And I would plead with parents in Utah, please get involved, know what's happening, because every day your child's having a certain experience in school. And I mean, my children, every single day, it's a new thing that they're confronting and trying to navigate. And we can help them. If, like you talked about, that lens, if these kids are being taught to only look through life at this certain lens, we're in for a world of hurt.
Well, and really quickly, I mean, the power of the parents is so important for Canyon School District, where most of my other children went. The parents complained about SEL, and kudos to Canyon's district for yanking it immediately and said, we are going to look into this. We're going to investigate. We're going to put it on a table. They let the parents come see the curriculum. That should be the standard for every district.
Absolutely.
Every district. And it's the power of the parents.
It is. And just really quickly, last thing, one of the most beautiful things about Utah is in our state constitution, it clearly defines that parents are the sole arbiters of their children. Let's appreciate that and use that. We decide what our children are taught, what goes in and on their bodies.
Absolutely.
Thank you. This has been fascinating. Thanks for your work.
Thank you.
We'll see you next week.